Welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where everything we talk about is building enduring great companies. I'm Brad Giles, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence. How are you doing today, Kevin?
I'm doing awesome, Brad. How you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you. Yeah, very good. Very rainy day here in Australia, but apart from that, pretty good. So tell me, what do we got on today's episode?
Yeah, well, today we're going to talk about how people are uncomfortable telling the truth to their bosses or people that they work with, and in particular about the mental health toll and strain that they're experiencing, which is obviously very concerning because we know people are under a lot of stress. And if you don't talk about the things that are bothering you, at some point they can build up and get worse. So we're
Yeah.
going to dig into a great article we found on Forbes, I believe it was. And about a study about why people are either comfortable or in this case, not comfortable talking about the mental health challenges they're having and the burnout that they're experiencing.
Awesome. So for reference, the Forbes article, more than half of employees are afraid to discuss mental health with their boss, new data shows. And this is something that you're pretty passionate about. Before we dig into it, I know it was a big part of your book. So how do you see, before we dig into it, Kevin, maybe just how have you seen writing about mental health resonate with entrepreneurs, with leaders in your experience since you've written about it and been speaking about it, I guess, across the world?
Yeah, I have had the chance to talk about it around the world. It's shocking to say the least. Like, I knew it was an issue from the CEOs and execs that I work with and dealing with them when mental health issues came up. But when I wrote about it and I started talking about it and talking about the fact where I also would get burned out and, mentally get destroyed, fairly frequently, people started coming out of the woodwork with stories and examples and sharing their own challenges with it. And what it came to be is, it seems the highest performers seem to have the biggest mental toll on them when things go crazy or get tough, or just the stress generally, because they generally push themselves so hard. So I thought it was something that, I had seen a lot of, but it seems to be almost everyone goes through periods where life deals them, a bad hand of cards, and then they pay with it with their mental well-being. So it's become quite shocking, actually, and how prevalent it is. And obviously then you have something like this that comes along, or other big events that happen in people's world, and it becomes concerning because it's almost mathematical. It's going to take its toll.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm seeing that. We've discussed it before. We're both seeing it. It's a really big issue at the moment. And so again, before we dig into it, how has your writing, you just mentioned that people have come out of the woodwork, but how has it changed your perspective perhaps? So you've written about it, you've put it out there. So how do you look at it differently as a subject now compared to before you wrote about it, if at all?
Yeah, I think I look at mental health the way I look at paper cuts and breaking a toenail and injuring yourself occasionally. It is just part of life. It's an inevitable part of life where the stress gets to you, period. And it happens to everyone, because the toughest, most resilient people I've worked with experience it. And it probably explains why so many people would be medicated for not feeling good. But it's just, life can be stressful. Everyone deals with it. And almost like learning how to brush your teeth and go to the dentist, I think we all need to understand it and do a combination of prevention and then repair when it does get a little crazy or a little out of hand. But it's a normal part of life. People just don't want to talk about it because it makes them feel less than or weak. But we all have to face it and deal with it. So it's as common as a filling at the dentist.
Yeah, it happens to everyone. We need to be able to manage through it ourselves. But more importantly, I think if you're going to build an enduring great company and you're going to surround yourself with A players, you need to have this as a normal part of life that you can work through, because people will
Yes.
dip into issues. Everyone has a life. Everyone has, I remember in the entrepreneurs organization that I was involved in, we do this exercise called the lifeline. Okay. And that is
Oh
on
yeah.
the left-hand
I
side, I
love
was
that.
born, and we go, life was great. And then life sucked. And so we go high, low, high, low. And having seen a lot of those lifelines over time, it reinforces what we already know to me, which is, everyone goes through stuff. Everybody goes through stuff. And it's just about knowing, like you said, you broke a toenail or whatever it is, you're going to go through stuff and you've got to get through that. So if you're going to build an enduring, great company, what you've got to be able to do is to treat it like that, to look after your people, to support your people through these challenges, and have that perspective rather than, this person must be, I don't know, weak, or whatever it is they might be thinking.
Yeah, you need to understand it yourself. And for a lot of leaders, they don't want to admit that they themselves have struggled mentally, although I know you have. Or if you haven't, you're one of the 1% that hasn't, or hasn't been conscious of it. But the main thing is for it to feel normal, and admitting it doesn't make you weak or a loser or less successful. Admitting it makes you actually stronger and more open, and opens the door for people to share it with you. But if you go back into this article, they did a survey of 1,000 full-time employees, and 54% said they were uncomfortable talking to their managers and supervisors about mental health. Worse is that 30% feared discussing their mental health could lead to being fired or furloughed. And 29% thought discussing these issues could cost them a promotion. So basically, admitting that you're going through a rough patch in your brain, people are thinking it's going to make them more likely to lose their employment, which is a scary thing. Now, an uneducated person around mental health, I could understand that. And probably announcing it in the middle of a team meeting, or sending a note to the board of directors about it, might not be your best move. But you got to remember, if you've got a great manager who understands these things and is taking care of you as they should, they're going to understand that you're going through a rough patch and that you will come back. Any manager that thinks because you're in a rough patch that you're rough and it'll continue is someone who doesn't understand mental health and the cycles and flows that we go through based on circumstances. So I get that people are afraid, and I guess in some ways is they don't either trust their manager, or because they think it's rare. And this is the thing that's the shocking, Brad. Every time I talk with people around mental health and their issue, and I hear people saying, my brain is not functioning. I've got problems sleeping, panic attacks, drinking way too much, or other addictions kicking in. And I'm like, oh yeah, totally normal. I hear it all the time. It's almost like they relax. They're like, really? I'm not broken. I'm not strange. I'm not screwy. It's like, well, no, this is the stuff that we hear constantly. It's a normal part of life.
Part of life.
It is, and that it really helps people to relax. So I think the people that carry a lot of fear is they don't realize it's a normal part of life. And truly, their managers may not either. And I think that's why they're so afraid of it, is that they think, because if they knew it was a normal part of life, like, people aren't afraid to admit that they lost their keys, broke a nail, or had a cavity. Like, it's, we don't love it, but it's part of life. People aren't afraid to admit those things normally. Now,
it hurts.
Yes.
It hurts when you injure yourself physically. It hurts when you injure yourself mentally, but we get better. We need to work to get better and recover. It's just what happens. And it has a stigma, or it has certainly when we were younger, perhaps there was more of a stigma, but if today, it's a completely different world. And in this world, we understand through science, through research, through simply becoming more accepting and understanding how people operate. This is just how life is. We go through things. And for the overachievers that we typically work with, they're going to push themselves harder. The CEOs, the entrepreneurs, the leaders in those businesses. And when you push yourself harder, you're more likely to get injured, physically or
More
mentally.
likely, almost guaranteed. Yeah, so I'd like to dig into I want to speak to the individuals and to their leaders or managers, but I want to just kind of ground this in some of my own experience. Like I seriously burnt myself out for the first time at 24, and I talk about this in my keynotes, but I cooked myself. I was working so hard in the company I was at. Plus, I was partying so hard many nights a week and on the weekends. I mean, I was having an awesome time and I was getting amazing results in my work, but I cooked myself seriously. And I think back then it took me about 2 years to recover because I didn't understand it. You know, it was interesting. I went to my boss's boss, who was a really good guy. And I said, hey, you know, what do I do here? And you know what his advice was?
No.
Get a big mortgage.
Just a sec.
And sorry, Siri, we don't need your help. Thank you. But yeah, get a big mortgage because I wasn't motivated. I didn't want to get up in the morning. He goes, well, Kevin, you need something to motivate you. And there's nothing like a big mortgage. And, you know, and the reality is I was 24. I didn't want to buy a house. So I went and got the biggest line of credit the bank would give me. And I spent it all.
Yeah.
And I still didn't want to get up in the morning. And the thing is, I didn't understand really what was going on. So I didn't know how to fix it because I didn't actually know what it was. And the people around me probably didn't either. And in hindsight, I did, but it really got me onto this path of being curious about it. Now, I burnt out seriously, potentially aside from that time at 24, I got burnt out the most I've probably ever been burnt out since. And I burn myself out every couple of years on average, sometimes less, sometimes more. But I was cooked. And we were in a recent session, and we use this tool called the Mental Health Continuum. You can search for it online. And it walks you through where you're at mentally. You can be green is good, yellow is a little off, orange, you're kind of in trouble, and red, you need help. And you know, I'll regularly go through green, yellow, orange. But I hit red. Like I hit red in the last couple of months, and I didn't realize it until I was sitting in a meeting with one of the companies you work with. And I think I mentioned this on an earlier podcast. But we were talking about mental health, and the CEO just asked everyone to raise their hand. Hey, if you've been orange or red, if you have been or are orange or red, raise your hand. Everyone raise their hand. You know, even one of the people started getting really emotional because they were really cooked. But I started going through the prescriptions. And I'm reading, my sleep got seriously messed up. Like I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I was drinking more than normal. That's back off again, which is good. But there was 2 or 3 of the criteria in the red zone that I was absolutely experiencing. And it's not scary for me because I've been there before and I know how to get back, and I know that I will get back. But it really freaks some people out, and because they don't really understand what's going on. And then, of course, they're not able to get the right help or even help themselves, which is kind of what we want to get to here today.
And so tell me, let's go back to when you were 24. What is your advice, or if you were the manager, you step into the manager's shoes and you approach yourself, if you know what I mean. How do you deal with that situation when someone comes up to you now differently than your manager did? Not as you as the 24-year-old, but if a 24-year-old came to you.
Well, I go back to, he did give me some other ideas, I think, beyond that. He must have. That's just the one I remember in all respect of him. I go back to the chapter in my book on resilience rituals. Yeah. And it's what do you have to do to stay strong and resilient, which is a combination, you know, for me, it's exercise, writing, adventures or fun socialization with my friends and family, updating my to-do list. So there's a bunch of things I know that really kind of help me to reset, and getting into nature too, would be that. And if they're really seriously in trouble, there's this part of the mental health continuum is that if you're really in orange or red and I don't know if I was then. I really can't. I probably was in orange. But it's to talk to a psychologist or mental health professional, like get to an expert who that's their job. And there's this thing called ALGE from the Mental Health Associations of the World. So ALGE, A, assess for risk of suicide or harm. L, listen non-judgmentally. G, get professional help, which is a psychologist or a counselor generally, or a psychiatrist in some cases if you're really, really in trouble, but is to get them to an expert. And I'll come back to a metaphor about that in a second. E, encourage self-care strategies, which would be like the resilience rituals in my book. And then there's one more. Don't have it off the top of my head. But the idea of it is just get them to go and talk to someone. Get them to go and talk to a counselor or a psychologist, which again, in our society, mental health has a stigma, and so does psychologists and counselors. And I don't know why, because they help you to unpack the junk in your brain. It's actually insanely helpful. And here's the way I look at it. In our society, hurting yourself physically doesn't have any stigma. None. So you're out doing an activity, you fall, you break a leg, you got a compound fracture. No stigma. And everybody knows what to do. Call 911 in most countries in the world, and they'll get you to a doctor, and a doctor who's an expert in fixing broken bones will put you back together again. Your friends don't try to fix it. They don't give you advice. They don't even try. But with mental health, it's different. Somehow people think they have they care about you and they think they can help, but they don't, because they don't understand. And it's no different than a compound fracture. You should just get a hold of the psychologist or the counselor. So if I go back and what I would do today, what I do today is if they're yellow and just a little bit of orange, is get them to take care of themselves. But when I've got people that it looks like they're on the edge of losing it or potentially losing their life, even before that, I have a good friend that started having panic attacks and freaking out. We talked about it. He was very embarrassed. First thing, let's get you to a psychologist. I had another guy that was beyond cooked. Turns out, what we worked on actually saved his life. He was seeing a psychologist 3 times a week. A really successful entrepreneur who had been through hell. So take care of yourself and get to the expert, and basically get that compound fracture that's happening in your brain fixed up.
Yeah, the brain is a muscle. Think about it that way. It's been damaged. The problem is that as you go into this doom loop of negative reinforcing issues with mental health, the things that you tell yourself can make sense. And
even though they're wrong,
100%.
they can absolutely make sense. And that's the dangerous part, really dangerous part.
Yeah. So if nothing else, being able to ask someone or talk to someone is a great kind of ripcord to pull you out of that doom loop. But if that person doesn't have that capability because it makes so much sense to them, well, maybe I need to drink more, or maybe I need to stay up later, or whatever is going to reinforce those things. That's where we kind of got to look out for each other. And as bosses, as co-workers, we've got to look out for each other as well. And there's no reason. Go on.
No, we do. And that's what we have to keep an eye out, because people self-medicate. If I've got a compound fracture and I can't fix it, and let's just say I stop the bleeding, I'm going to be in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to start drinking more. And I'll probably be open to all kinds of drugs and substances that I would never be open to, because I'm in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So mentally, the same things happen. And that's why we got to watch the people close to us and watch their behavior. So one of the things in mental health, you just watch for changes. You watch for attitude changes. I observe how people are with alcohol. If you got a buddy and you go out and you have a bunch of drinks one night and have some fun, it's good. But if all of a sudden they seem to want to do it all the time, but you watch when people don't return your calls and people just disappear off the face of the earth. Usually it's because they're mentally messed up and they're kind of hiding out. So that's
This
where we got to
gone.
watch. And what I will tell you, when you read the description of the red zone, sometimes it looks like a bad employee, where it might actually be a good employee in a bad place. So there's a lot of responsibility in this for us to just have our eyes open for ourselves, so we're prepared when our turn comes, for our loved ones, and for our team. So in companies that we work with, we're not perfect about it, but we always share the mental health talk. Just was in with a client in another part of Canada this week. Actually got to get on an aeroplane, which was kind of wild experience.
How was it? You said that last week. How was it getting on the plane?
It was awesome. Look at, I had my N95 medical grade mask. The second I stepped into the airport, I had it on. Didn't take it off except for when I ate something and drank something. And I was doing, the tipping it up, to eat, almost like, in the Middle East, you see women who have their face covered and they will kind of lift up to eat. It was sort of a similar technique. And everyone was wearing masks. It felt very safe. I had extra stuff to, clean my seat and stuff like that. Yeah, the plane was full. Business was half full. The rest of the plane was full or very close to full. Now, only a little section of the airport was open. I was apprehensive, but in the end, it was like, yeah, okay, no problem. Yeah, wow. It was interesting. So back to with this client, this client also did a talk on mental health, which we like to redo regularly. It's a short, 15, 20 minutes, explaining what's going on, the mental health continuum, and then what to do. And you can see some of the eyes just opening wide. They're like, ooh, I got some of this going on.
Yeah.
So there's lots of education. So the mental health continuum is a great model. There's a program that the Mental Health Associations of the World put on called Mental Health First Aid, which you can bring into your company. And this algae model of what do you do when someone has an issue are all really good resources. But the most important thing is that you normalize it and help destigmatize it by talking about it openly and admitting that you've had your own issues, and not that you're Mr. or Miss Perfect around it, because we know you're not. But we got to make it easier or more socially acceptable to talk about this. Go ahead, Brad.
I find that I definitely agree with what you said, but something from the article and some other work that I've done that I wrote about is really interesting at this point, because what you said, we've got to destigmatize it. Okay. But I want to read a sentence from that article, and I quote, "And yet, notwithstanding those findings, we encountered an untold number of senior executives who simply wouldn't countenance bad news." So countenance meaning they wouldn't find it acceptable in any way to discuss bad news. So if you're, and I've seen this before, where there is an attitude, because for me, it's very much about confront the brutal facts. And I come across many leaders who are like, look, there's only one message. It's got to be always positive. It doesn't matter what's happening. It's always got to be positive. And I wonder if that's...
Nobody trusts those people. Nothing is ever that positive.
But you see them. It's not like 1 in 100.
I've met them.
There's
they're
a lot
all
of
like
people that are
happy,
like
shiny plastic people.
And people can see through it. And I wonder if there's a correlation between those types of people who say we can only talk about the positive news, the positive things, not wanting to, I think, as you said, not wanting to make it acceptable to discuss in a healthy manner that people are going to have problems. And if that's the case, maybe becoming a bit more vulnerable as a leader to be able to talk about the bad news, not just about mental health, about anything, is a first good step.
It is, and there is a balance in it. Because if you're the CEO of the company and you come in and you're sharing the depth of your despair in a critical time and start, constantly breaking down and crying in front of your team, like that is bad leadership. right?
Oh,
Like
absolutely.
there is a fine line, and I'll give you an example. So so even when I would be very burnt out, I'm showing up and I'm doing what I can. I'm keeping my commitments the best of my ability. You know, I become a little bit more late on some things, mostly for internal meetings or for meetings like with people like yourself. But for my but basically, I'm standing, I'm delivering, I'm doing what I need to, and then I take, when I'm not working, more time to take care of myself. There are the people who flake out and can't keep it together. Now, sometimes people do have to take some time off to recover. We you know, that's in the more extreme cases, which I think is the right thing to do if they need to. But there are the people that that don't deliver as expected, or formally take time off and just kind of fade away and become mediocre. Like there's a fine line, one about the communication and still doing your job. You know, and if you get to the point where you can't and you got to go and get some help for a couple of weeks, that's I get that. So when you come from a leadership perspective, you know, I'll use myself as an example. I will do my job and I'm not going to be there complaining or crying or any of this other stuff, right? But at some point when we talk about it, I'll admit, yeah, you know what? I haven't been sleeping well. I tell you what, I'm more tired and I've been drinking more than I normally would. I know I need some recovery time. Okay, and let's get back to work. Right?
Yeah.
It's you're delivering in your role to the best of your ability at a high level and being open about some of the stuff that's going on, not talking about it for 2 hours, not disrupting meetings, and not doing things that would completely destroy the confidence of your team.
But you're being vulnerable, and that vulnerability builds trust. There's
Yes,
still
I
the
heard
mission.
it absolutely. So it's not just all happy shiny people, but as a leader, your job is to suck it up and push through and find a way to lead people to greatness and be open. And you know, the thing that hit me, one of my clients, somebody said to me, Kevin, you don't know how powerful it is that you shared that you were strained mentally as well. Because the CEO said, the team said, hey, if it happens to Coach Kevin, it can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
So because I am, like a lot of leaders, strong and resilient and always up for whatever is up.
Yep.
You know, the fact that I could have a chink in my armor or, you know, be mentally get ground down made them feel more relieved and okay about themselves. Because people look at us sometimes like we're superhuman. We're not, but they look at us like we are. And that's a dangerous role model to set if you're not telling some of the truth about what's going on.
I had a very similar example a couple of months ago. I had my first in-person strategic planning workshop with a team. Been working with this team for, I guess, 7 or 8 years. And we'd all been in isolation. And then this was the first time that we'd come together as a group. And I shared with them, I said, look, you know, like this is kind of strange. It's the first time that I've met people in person in 3 months where they haven't been a family member or a neighbor. Like it's really quite strange. And it's a bit surreal for me. So there was that vulnerability that we've got to get through it. And then I also introduced the concept of, for the staff in that team, the broader team, of a leave pass. And I said, look, you know, if it's affecting me and it's affecting you, it's clearly affecting other people. And we're the leaders. Like if it's affecting the leaders, it's going to affect everybody just the same. And I said, if someone's normally an A player, if normally they're doing everything right and they've been acting a bit wacky, if they've been acting a bit strange, if they haven't been doing what they normally do in the last few months or recently, like maybe we've just got to give them a leave pass this time, support them, go back to the mental health continuum, the mental health assessment tool that you mentioned earlier. And we've just got to look at them, and they can become A players, but it's our job to rebuild and to make sure that we support people.
Yeah. And even give them permission to take time off. Like I am pushing and encouraging people, take time off. And, you know, one company we work with, they've been pushing so hard and they've delivered exceptionally during this crazy time, but people are terrified to take time off because they've just got some great momentum and they don't want to screw it up. And they don't want to be seen as the slacker taking downtime, because the culture is a very hardworking company. So it's tough. Like, anyway, and Brad, I think we should sort of talk about what are the things that we're seeing people do or recommend that people do right now. It's summer in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're recommending, people like get 1 or 2 weeks off and find a way to create a vacation, even though for most of us, our vacation options are very limited. Like, again, in Canada, most people will go, whether they go to Europe or Mexico or US, a lot of people get out of Canada in the summertime and go other places. That's when, kids are off school, etc. You can't do that. Lots of people have recreational places where I am across the border. My family has one. It's about an hour door to door, but it's in the US. Can't go there. So a lot of people's plans have been somewhat messed up. Their getaway and their recovery, and it's finding a way to get some time off and find a way to make it rejuvenating and recovering like you normally would is one of the basics for sure.
So what you're saying there is ensure that staff are taking appropriate annual leave. Is that right?
Yes. And, even if they don't have any annual leave, how do we get them to get a little bit of time off, or make it a priority on their weekends to have some recovery time? One company is talking about just saying, okay, why don't we just set it up, every second Friday, let's just plan for people to leave at noon if they're able to, and rotating Fridays. So half the staff does it 1 week, half the other in the summer, just to give people a little bit extra time.
The inverse of what you said is motivated or driven by anxiety. What I've kind of noticed early on a few months ago is that the population seemed to split into two groups really quickly. On the one hand were the people that were had nothing to do. They were, let's say, working from home, and they were, let's say, they were either laid off or they were working from home with not a lot to do. And the other hand are the people who had who were working harder than they'd ever worked in their life. And because they were trying to save companies, or they were trying to get stuff done, or pivot a company, or whatever it is. So I kind of noticed that split. And I think that above and beyond that is this overreaching anxiety as to what's going to happen. And no one could answer that. What's going to happen? And I think it's still there to a degree. What's going to happen in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And you and I have spoken extensively about that. But when we look at that anxiety, and the way that manifests and the way that people are uncertain, and then you bring that back, what happens is people work harder than they should, because they think, what's going to work here is if I work harder. And I've certainly felt that myself. I know that you have too.
Yeah.
So now I need to work harder, and there's no escape from that loop. There's no way to get out of that.
No, and there's not going to be a time where you're in the near future when you're going to say that I don't need to work harder, because we're in time of uncertainty. And you're right, it builds anxiety. And some people go hide under a rock or go sit and relax. And some people go get to work, like we're wired, and lots of the companies that we work with are. But if you want to keep up that pace, you still need to rest. You need downtime to be able to sustain that pace. Let's just say that if you combine the stress of our situation and the external stress and worry about what the heck is happening with our friends and family and parents, etc., let's just say that for a lot of us, we're working 30 to 50% harder, or there's 30 to 50% more energy consumed in our work because of, or in our life because of this. Well, you got to find a way to replenish that 30, even if it's 10%. You got to find a way to replenish it so you can sustain it. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. And so that's why I think
you're going.
Go, keep going, please jump in.
It's a marathon because the anxiety may tell you to work super hard now because that's the only thing. But let's be fair. We're in the dance, the hammer in the dance. To refer to that, we're in the dance. They're in Melbourne at the moment. We've gone from, let's say, 7 cases a day to 700, and the whole of Melbourne is locked down. Like, you can't even leave your house without a government issued permit. It's absolutely crazy. And yeah, so these things are going to happen, and this is not going to end in a week's time. So you've got to be able to sustain that, and the only way you can make it through the next month and the next quarter, and however long it goes for, is sustainability, is looking after yourself, taking for
Correct.
yourself and your employees.
Because if you don't recover, it gets worse. And you slide further down the mental health continuum because you get more cooked and more depleted, and your brain has crazier thoughts.
Yeah.
And that is how people end up committing suicide. People get to a point where the brain's telling them that it'll never get better and it's a one-way road to misery, and that they are miserable. But those people need time to recover and replenish and get. So if you go too far, it gets really rough. You know, and I've had friends that have ended up in recovery houses. I had one very good friend of mine, an amazing, brilliant guy. He ended up on absolute crazy drinking benders. He passed out in the city he lives in. His wife got a call from a stranger saying, yeah, we found this guy here passed out in an alley. Took him home. The next night, you know, he ends up like fetal position on the kitchen floor and going into recovery for 2 months, like to a recovery house for 2 months, because he was absolutely mentally destroyed, and his coping mechanism was alcohol. And you know, and again, these are good, smart people, not crazy people. It's just, you know, if you don't take care of yourself, it gets worse. Just like many rock stars and pop stars who either end up messed up or they're no longer with us. So it's real serious stuff, and finding that time and it doesn't take a huge amount of time. It just takes some conscious effort, and often, you know, talking to an expert, which takes me to another really disturbing point in this research. It says only 5% of people said they spoke with an HR representative. Now, it's not surprising to me, although it's disturbing. So when people are having mental health issues, you know, HR is supposed to be a trusted resource to be there for the best of the people and help the people. Now, in many companies I work with, people would never go to HR because they don't trust HR, unfortunately.
Why?
So
why don't they trust HR?
Just for the same reasons, like with mental health, they don't trust that if they share something with HR, it'll be kept confidential and in their best interest, because, you know, HR is almost like in some companies, like the police. They're watching out to make sure that people don't do the wrong things. So it is unfortunate. I have met some HR practitioners who are amazing and trusted, but it's a hard position to be trusted in, because although you're taking care of the people, you're often involved with reprimanding the people when things don't go well. So no matter what, and it's no different than with children, people need a safe person they can talk to when things get weird. And, you know, I've done a lot of work with homeless people and people that have all kinds of other challenges. And one of the root causes of people that get into big trouble when they get mentally messed up is that they're afraid to ask for help. They don't have a trusted place to go. So my plea, my recommendation, my advice to people is, as a manager, how can you be that for your people? How can you be the person that they can trust and share their challenges with, so that when things do get rough, as they will, that you can help them and give them the right support, guidance, resources, whatever it happens to be. But it's on you.
So, yeah. So the essence of that is, how can you improve the level of trust that your delegates have with you? So
Correct.
Put another way, your employees may trust you with their work, but do your employees trust you with their money or their wife?
Okay. Okay, where are you going with that?
Well, I think it came from, it could have been Simon Sinek, where he was talking about the different levels in the American military. and they talk about, because they look at their peers and they say, yes, I trust you with my life, but that's one level of trust. But another level of trust is, do I trust you with my money or my wife?
Right.
And that level of trust. So how do you get, as a leader, how are you trusted? How do you get a deeper level of trust with the people
Yes.
who report to you?
Yeah. How do you build a strong relationship with a level of trust so that when they need help, they're going to ask you and you can help them at the end of the day? And that is a manager's job, is to create that dynamic. And I remember we did an event with Mark Cuban, who's a very successful American entrepreneur.
Yeah.
He had a company called broadcast.com that he sold years ago for, I think, $1.2 billion, owns the Dallas Mavericks. So we're at an event and we went to the pregame to the Mavericks just him. And he talked to, 100 of us, and a fascinating guy. But he talked about one of his things was called KYP. It's know your people. You got to know your people. You got to be close to them and know them and where they're at and where they're doing well and where they're struggling and what's going on in their world. That's how you can be the best manager, and not that far from being a great parent. So KYP is something that's very, very helpful in this. So you can keep doing the right things for your people, and people need it. And for yourself, if you're finding that you're resonating with the stuff that we're talking about around mental health and the stress and it affecting you, get some help. If it gets really weird, like your brain gets really crazy and tells you to do crazy stuff, just type mental health hotline into any search engine and you'll find a local one very quickly. Almost everywhere I've been in the world, I found one.
Yeah.
That's one thing. You can talk to your doctor, your family doctor. You can talk to a close friend and get them to help you figure it out. But at the end of the day, your brain, like a muscle, when it gets worn or it gets broken, it can be repaired. You just got to go to the right mechanic. And it's usually not your friends and family. It is a psychologist, a counselor, and in some cases, a psychiatrist, or the people that can help you kind of put it back together, and it's normal. And so that's the kind of root of all this for me, is that it's part of life, and events like this just push you even farther, and you're more likely to get some short-term brain damage that makes it a little bit harder.
So let's maybe round out some of the key topics. Number one was the mental health continuum. You can Google that. It's a tool that I use, and I know that you use, obviously, in your book. And it was actually in my book as well. But it's something that we both believe in really, really strongly for leaders to use, to have a quantitative measure of yourself, A, and B, the people that you are talking to. Number two is the trust. So building the trust with the people who report to you, I think. And knowing that 54%, to quote that article, are uncomfortable about mental health and discussing it with their manager. It's a great opportunity to build that trust, not only for the sake of mental health, but team performance, a whole range of different issues. So I think, was there a third one? Are they the two key takeaways, do you think?
I think they are. And just the fact that, it's normal. And there's a model called ALGE from the Mental Health Associations of the World that kind of just tell you what to do if something starts to get weird in your brain or with somebody you care about.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
A good chat today. Shall we round it out?
Yeah, I would just say, and everyone, thanks for listening. And, if you want to learn more about mental health, there's many great resources, but on both of our sites, we'll have resources. And so thanks for listening to the Growth Whisperers. I'm Kevin and this is Brad. And for the video version, go to youtube.com and search the Growth Whisperers. To reach Brad, evolutionpartners.com.au, and Kevin is lawrenceandco.com. Have an awesome week. Take care of yourself.